All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 60 today. Check us out at mikeandmauriceMindescape.com and patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. Our guest today is an author of a new book called Prehistory Decoded. I present to you Mr. Martin Sweatman.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. You?
Doing good, doing good.
Good.
Excellent.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background about how you got into this and where it all started?
Well, I've generally been interested in prehistory, ancient archaeology, that kind of thing. I mean, lots of people are. And particularly Gobekli Tepe, when it was first made public in about, I think it was that was discovered in 1994, but it wasn't made public till about 2004. So from then onwards, I was interested in Gobekli Tepe. I was, keeping up with the research literature and anything else that was coming out. And then, is it 2015? Graham Hancock's book, Magicians of the Gods, came out. So I had a look at that, and particularly the part about Pillar 43, the vulture stone, as it's known, at Gobekli Tepe. It really caught my attention, and I found that what Graham and Paul Burley had started in Magicians of the Gods actually went a lot deeper, so I could continue. They basically provided the key, and from then I could continue decoding all the way back to about 40,000 BC. So yeah, it was really, I've been interested in Gobekli Tepe, but it wasn't until I read Graham's book that it all fell into place.
Yeah. Both Fingerprints and Magicians are both great books, but as you speak, Gobekli's a little bit newer of a site. And it's interesting. Didn't the University of Chicago discover it in like the 1960s, but they thought it was a lot earlier or a lot closer to modern time than it actually was. So they just left it alone. And then there was a somehow it was a farmer that tripped over it or something like that, or saw it and decided, hey, there's something serious going on under here.
Yeah, that's how I understand the story as well. So as far as I know, there was a survey performed by a couple of universities, and they came across what they thought was an Iron Age cemetery. So basically what they'd uncovered there was the top of one of the pillars, just poking above the ground. But they left it alone, thinking it was, like you say, a more modern construction. But it wasn't until Klaus Schmidt, who went back to the site. He read the report and he went back to the site because he had a good idea that this was actually much more ancient than the report said. So he went back to the site, and he discovered this amazing, probably I would say now the most important archaeological site in the world.
Yeah. He's an interesting guy. Actually, I was watching his TED Talk on Gobekli last night. I was shocked it only had 96,000 views, and I see way dumber of topics on TED Talk that have like millions of views. So
Yeah, well,
it's
the public, my man.
it's interesting how it works that way.
Yeah.
But why don't you, so as far as your research goes, what was your background in this? Do you have any sort of formal background, or was it just a passion project?
Yeah, I have no background in this, just a general interest. That's all. I was very fortunate when I first came across this, having read Graham's book. I was teaching some undergraduate students, and one of my helpers, if you like, who in the teaching in the class was a PhD student, not my PhD student, someone else's PhD student named Demetrius Tsikritsis, and he happened to be an experienced archaeoastronomer. So actually, everything I've learned from him about how to actually sort of locate equinoxes and solstices and all this kind of thing. So I was talking to Demetrius about this idea that I'd had after reading Graham's book, and completely coincident. I had no idea that he was into this kind of thing as well. But so we put our heads together, and we went a lot further. And eventually, after probably a month or so, of trying to figure things out, we then wrote this paper, which got quite well known, our Fox paper. So decoding Gobekli Tepe with archaeoastronomy. What did the Fox say? So that was our paper, and I really needed Demetrius's help to do that.
Yeah, I think when good minds can come together, obviously it's it's a little bit better from a collaborative standpoint. You bounce ideas off each other, and it seems like there's a lot of people out there that have small groups that do this kind of stuff, and obviously scientific teams and stuff like that. But in terms of your book, how does all this play into the message that you believe these ancient builders were trying to send, if you will?
Yeah, so Gobekli Tepe is, if you like, the start of this journey of discovery. So it's I compare Gobekli Tepe to the Rosetta Stone. It's like a primer or the key, and once you have decoded this ancient zodiac, you can then go and try it out on different sites, and you find, or we found later that it worked. So this is now work with Alistair Coombs. So another sort of surreptitious, serendipitous sort of collaboration. So we then found that we could apply this scheme, this zodiacal scheme, to Çatalhöyük, which is another ancient site in Turkey, not quite as old as Göbekli Tepe, but the same system applies there. Code Lascaux, Lascaux Cave, the Paleolithic art. And
France.
having done, that's right, yeah. And having done that, it turns out that we could decode pretty much all of the animal symbols, or at least most of them, in these, at least in the Western European Paleolithic art caves. In fact, going all the way back to what's thought to be the earliest known statue. It's about a foot tall. It's called the Lion Man of Holsteinstadel Cave from Germany. It's 40,000 years old. So that Lion Man, we suspect, actually represents the constellation Cancer. And everything fits. And we've, all of this decoding, part of it is just kind of logical deduction. And the other part of our research is actually showing, or if you like, scientifically proving that we're correct by doing this scientific process called hypothesis testing. So we test our hypothesis against a large data set, and we find that basically it works all the time, or just about all the time, and with such good statistical, basically the chance that our predictions would work out is so small if it was wrong, that it essentially means that we have to be right.
How old do they estimate that Tepe is?
Well, yeah, good question. So the archaeologists have radiocarbon dated some of the mortar from the wall of enclosure D. So there are several enclosures that they've excavated. Probably the oldest one is enclosure D, and so the radiocarbon dating says that is 9,600 BC. 9,600 BC. Now, we, having decoded the vulture stone, the date that's written on that is, we think, the date of the Younger Dryas impact, which is about 10,900 BC. So that's about 1,300 years earlier. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the vulture stone or pillar 43 was built 1,300 years earlier. It just means that the date that's written on it is 1,300 years earlier than the radiocarbon date of the enclosure. Mm-hmm. So that pillar could have been constructed at any time between the actual Younger Dryas event and the construction of that stone wall at Göbekli Tepe. It's a 1,300-year gap. We don't know where it fits into that timeline.
So what, have you ever been to Gobekli Tepe? Have you done any research there?
No, I'd love to go. I probably will go soon. Maybe this coming summer or something. But I'd like to go all these sites that we've decoded, like the Paleolithic art in Europe as well. It's all fascinating. I'd love to go there.
Absolutely. I'd love to check it out as well. I think on my list, the Great Pyramid and Gobekli Tepe are probably high up on that list. What have you always been interested in? Ancient civilizations, and is this something that you've always been drawn into, or was it after reading a book, or like you said, Graham Hancock, or what got you into this subject?
I wouldn't. I don't know anything specific. I've always been curious, I suppose you would say, about what happened before known history, prehistory. In other words, I've always been curious. But my training's in physics, particularly theoretical physics. So I'm also very curious about the solar system and cometary impacts and that kind of business. So
we'll have you back on and specifically talk about physics next time. But yeah, that's one of our other favorite topics on here. Definitely, it's all these mysteries of life that even science can't explain. I guess that's what's so fascinating about them.
Yeah, I mean, what got me interested in physics as a young lad was it was all of the bizarre things about physics, so quantum mechanics and relativity and so on. So that's what really brought me into physics, and it's that kind of curiosity of the strangeness, actually, of the universe. I suppose that it's that kind of curiosity that also got me interested in these kind of prehistorical events which don't seem to quite match up to the conventional story. And yeah, so it's all very. I've always been interested in it. Remember Arthur C. Clarke?
Yeah.
So I was one of the young lads that used to watch the Arthur C. Clarke programs religiously. So all of these mysteries, yeah, fascinating.
For sure, for sure. As far as the vulture stone goes, I think that's probably the most famous T-pillar out of them all in terms of getting when it's on movies and different YouTube videos and different things. Do you think it's because of first of all, there's what's called the ancient handbags on the top? We've done an episode about that where we compared across the whole globe, all the different cultures have some form of these ancient handbags in their art. But underneath that, you've got the vulture with a disc. There's actually a few different types of birds. What do you think is going on in that image?
Well, it's all astronomical. We pretty much know that. Our statistics, our scientific case is now so secure that we pretty much know that this is all astronomical. So the animals are all representing different constellations. The disc is representing the sun in that particular case. That's right, on the summer solstice. If you go up a bit, I don't know if you can with that picture, but the handbags.
I can pull up a different picture.
Yeah. So the vulture or eagle there, I mean, it is called the vulture pillar or the vulture stone, but in my view, it's not a vulture. I think it's some kind of bird of prey. So that means either an eagle or a hawk or something. And the reason I say that is because through later work, and if you look at my blog, I have a blog at martinsweatman.blogspot.com where I'm continuing this research. Being able to correlate the Gobekli Tepe with ancient Egypt. So the vulture there is actually Sagittarius, and so is Horus in Egypt, probably representing.
So be a falcon instead, you think, huh?
Yeah, it's a bird of prey of some description, falcon, hawk, or eagle, or something like that. So the handbags at the top, it's an image of the sun on the horizon. Okay, so it's actually like a reverse image. It's so you got three. So those three images at the top, those three little creatures, they are representing these the other solstices and equinoxes. So the vulture, or sorry, I keep saying the vulture. The bird of prey or the eagle is the summer solstice. The other three are the two equinoxes and the winter solstice. So if you go from the left, the one that's on the left there, the little sort of bird that's leaning over, that's representing Pisces. And that's, I forget which one, I think that's the spring equinox. The one in the middle, that's Gemini. and that's representing the winter solstice. And the one on the right is Virgo, so that's representing the, probably not the wrong way around. I think actually it's Virgo that's spring and Pisces is autumn equinox. So it's all astronomical. The other animal symbols, so obviously you've got the scorpion is Scorpio. Underneath that, you've got this sort of another bird that's representing Libra. And just to the left of that, you've got what looks like a dog-like figure that's representing Lupus. And the strange figures to the right of I keep saying vulture, of the bird, probably represent Ophiuchus or a constellation in that region. Yeah, it's all astronomical.
So then what does the disk represent? The sun?
The disk there is a sun at the summer solstice, and it's showing the position of the sun relative to Sagittarius at the summer solstice. And that's how we can work out the date. So it's about 10,950 BC to within a couple of hundred years. We can't be more accurate than that. Yeah, and which matches very well with the Younger Dryas event.
Have you compared the T-pillars with, this kind of stuff with other sites? Like I know there's been some sort of correlation I think Dr. Schock tries to make with the whatchamacallit,
on Malta?
Well, no, there's I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. But on Easter Island, the bird, you see the so-called vulture is a very similar looking bird to the make, which is the bird cult of Easter Island.
Right. Okay. I don't know if they are connected. Easter Island.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure it's not, but I just find it does. If I could try and pull up a picture, but it does look very similar in terms of.
Yeah.
But it could just be that's how people drew birds back then too. That could be.
I mean, having said, can't be sure that it's connected. There might be a connection. It's not something that we should just rule out. It's entirely possible, and this is something that I talk about in my book. And that Gobekli Tepe is just part, I think, of a much more ancient system of astromythology. So a combination of astronomy and mythology together, and it was all tied in with comets and their destructive impacts.
Right.
And this, I think, is extremely ancient, going back perhaps more than 40,000 years. So given that timescale, and that sounds incredible, but the evidence is there. So it's a suggestion at the moment that there is this timescale to it. So that's not proven. But the only thing that we've proven is in a scientific sense, is the matchup between the animal symbols and the constellations. But anyway, in my book, I talk about this idea of this ancient astromythology going back 40,000 years. And if you think about that kind of timescale, then yeah, it's possible that these places like Easter Island and Gobekli Tepe and so on, there could be a link, but it's at the moment it's very tenuous, if there is any.
Sure. But have you looked at any other sites that possibly, have anything similar in terms of the archaeoastronomy work? Or is this something that, like you said, I know your book's Prehistory Decoded, as if this is some sort of, maybe since it was one of the earliest ones that, they weren't as advanced with their symbolism or...
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what we find. That the furthest back we've gone is with the European cave art. So, like I said, there was this statuette, the Lion Man of Holsteinstadel Cave. That's about 40,000 years old. Come forward in time slightly, and you've got basically all the rest of the cave art in Western Europe. And I'm just talking about Western Europe at the moment, but I suspect that this is the same for all of this cave art. It's all the same kind of system across the world. But just focusing on the European cave art, that's what we've actually scientifically shown matches up. So that goes back to about 37,000 years ago in places like Chauvet. Coming forward a bit, you've then got caves like Lascaux, Altamira. Again, it all matches up. Come forward a bit, you've got Gobekli Tepe. come forward a bit to about 7,000, 6.5 to 7,000 BC, you've got this other site called Çatalhöyük, which was very famous about, let's say, 40 or 50 years ago when it was first discovered. So in archaeological circles, this is a well-known site, Çatalhöyük. And so what matches up there, that there are four kinds of shrine at Çatalhöyük that have been discovered by the archaeologists, and only 4 types of shrine. And these shrines correspond to different animal types. So you've got like a bull worshipping shrine, a leopard worshipping shrine, a bear worshipping shrine, and a ram worshipping shrine. And again, that matches up perfectly with our zodiacal hypothesis. So we can, based on our zodiac, we know what the date of this site is. So you've got Çatalhöyük. And then if you come further forward in time, as I explained on my blog, I've written a couple of articles. We can show now that, well, we suggest that the same system was in use in ancient Egypt. So this very ancient system, the Egyptians knew about it, pretty sure about that. For example, if you take the god Amun, so he was very ancient. He was one of the earliest gods in ancient Egypt, and during the Middle Kingdom, so he was kind of like the patron god of Thebes, which is Luxor. So it was called Thebes at the time. So during the Middle Kingdom, Amun was known to have basically like a duck. He was sort of represented by a duck. And I suggest the reason that is because that was the autumn equinox at that time, was in Libra, which in our system is the duck. But then in the New Kingdom, Amun becomes really popular because Thebes becomes the center of the whole of the Egyptian state. Amun becomes the sort of chief deity of everything. And his sort of animal sign or symbol switches to a ram, from duck to ram. And that, again, agrees completely with our zodiacal hypothesis. So basically what they've done there is switched between the Middle and New Kingdoms. They've switched from autumn to spring equinox, which is the switch from duck to ram. And it fits perfectly. There are other clues as well. The Scorpion King, for instance, is an ancient, was like a pre-dynastic, or supposedly a pre-dynastic king, but actually it corresponds simply to the autumn equinox, Scorpio, at the time that he's thought to be alive. So there are lots and lots of clues like this. Another one is the Shemsu Hor. So these are the followers of Horus that are supposed to have preceded dynastic Egypt. In the north of Egypt, there was this group of leaders or warrior kings known as the Shemsu Hor. Well, that corresponds again to Sagittarius. They were around at the time that Sagittarius was, I think, in that case, the spring equinox or the autumn equinox. So, it all fits up. So it's pretty clear that the ancient Egyptians knew about this zodiac and a precession of the equinoxes. It's there as well. And more recently, again, I haven't written this down yet, but the Sumerians as well. It's 1,000 years right through to the Bronze Age in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. It's the same system.
So that's why you think you see some of these animal head gods. You think that it correlates to the different equinoxes and different constellations?
Yeah. So going back to your question, I kind of got diverted.
No, that's good. I was just curious if that's what your hypothesis was.
Yeah. So it starts off as animal symbols representing constellations at the solstices and equinoxes. So we see that in Gobekli Tepe, at Çatalhöyük, and further back in time in the cave art in Western Europe. But as we come forward in time to, Egypt especially, and Sumeria, we see that their mythology becomes a lot more complex now. And so the constellations that were just animals have now become sort of animal deities with their own sort of personalities. Like, so you have Seth. So he's the sort of fox-headed god of chaos. Basically, that corresponds to Aquarius, I suspect. at Gobekli Tepe. So I don't know if you remember the tallest pillar at Gobekli Tepe in enclosure D. One of the two central pillars has a fox on the side. Yeah. So that fox is representing Aquarius, and I suspect that 7,000 years later, that fox becomes the god Set in ancient Egypt. So that there's this kind of you expect all of these symbols to change with time, but for 30,000 years, it seems they hardly did. But then as we get past the Younger Dryas event and into the Neolithic period, civilization begins, and things start to change much more quickly. So you now have a slightly different flavor of mythology in Egypt compared to Mesopotamia, although fundamentally they are probably based on the same very ancient system. They're starting to diverge. They look slightly different now.
Yeah, so the I know we've had Laird Scranton on. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he actually showed me a picture. There's a Dogon have an altar carving, an altar stone that has like the almost the exact same fox, like a relief carving like that. Do you think that this Gobekli Tepe was like the center for a bunch of different civilizations, and that's, or what's your, in terms of your research and hypothesis on who were the people of Gobekli Tepe?
Yeah, I mean that's a really great question. So um, I don't actually know much about Laird Scranton's work. I've not really looked into it. I'm very interested to hear that they have carvings of a fox. I'd have to look into that. That
Yeah,
sounds
he's got a
sounds
book. I
really
think it's
interesting.
called Point of Origin,
Right.
about the specific topic.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, my idea, if you like, my suggestion is that Göbekli Tepe was, well, there was this very widespread, I suspect, mythology, astro mythology before Göbekli Tepe. And then, this is what I suggest in my book anyway, and then there was this Younger Dryas impact event. And that kind of catalyzed a new kind of religion, a much more fearful, perhaps, religion that was able to get people to work together. So after the event, I think there was some kind of existential crisis. People were wondering, why has this happened to us? What should we do? What can we do? And so it kind of bound people together, actually. And there was this kind of beginning of a new flavor of religion, which we see at Göbekli Tepe. And it's that carried on. It's that actually helped to stimulate or catalyze the beginning of civilization. So it was a really important event in the origin of civilization, I suggest.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing that civilization as we know it owes something to this incredible cosmic event. And then, like you say, so then it's the kind of center of this mythological, this new religion. And from that, we have the origin of civilization, which includes agriculture as a byproduct. And then there's this explosion of population and migration out from that region. This is known in the archaeological world as the Neolithic Revolution. So there's this population explosion, civilization begins, and this sort of farming combined with this new religion spreads rapidly outwards. And but it doesn't stay the same. Wherever it goes, it subtly changes. So that's why we see differences in Mesopotamia compared to ancient Egypt. Perhaps the Dogon, I wouldn't be surprised if the Dogon was related to that somehow. It's not something I've looked into, though.
Sure.
I think
Well, I
the
mean,
way
I know too. There's awesome Australian or Aboriginal symbolism on some of the pillars. I don't know if you've looked into any of that.
the time scale would be so far apart. So it's hard. It's very hard to see how there could be connections, but it's not something that could be ruled out. And like I say, I suggest in the book Prehistory Decoded that there is this very ancient system that goes back maybe 40,000 years or more. So that kind of timescale would allow some kind of connection, perhaps between somewhere very distant, like Australia and Western Europe. So it's a possibility. It's intriguing for sure.
Do you think the people back then were more advanced than we give them credit? in the sense of knowing about the stars and the cosmos?
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of astronomy, this is a bit of a revelation, I think, for academia. So it's, I mean, for quite a long time, we've known that people, say 20,000 years ago, we knew they were artistic because we see their paintings.
Right.
And we find evidence of sculpture, and archaeologists have found very fine bone flutes in these European caves. So they were making music, making their instruments, great paintings. So they were clearly very artistic, and that in itself suggests or proves, a sophisticated mind. So now that we know that they were also really good astronomers, they were able to track the motion of the stars. They were able to predict precession of the equinoxes. They were able to measure things. So they were good scientists as well, or it was the beginning of science. So they were no difference to us in terms of their intellectual ability, no different to us at all. Of course, their technology was primitive, at least that's what I suspect. And this is probably where I would differ from maybe some other commentators, perhaps like Graham Hancock, who might suggest that before the Younger Dryas period, there was perhaps some advanced civilization. And what he means by advanced, I'm not entirely sure, but certainly I agree people were more advanced in terms of their astronomical ability than we give them credit for, they have been given credit for. But beyond that, I don't know. I don't think there's any more kind of technology than just being good astronomers. Well, there could be.
Yeah,
we just don't.
I
we
think
just don't have the evidence.
I think what he means actually is just that. Okay, so both Graham Hancock and Dr. Robert Schoch's premise usually, when they talk about these things, is that some event, which Graham Hancock, obviously Randall Carlson, believe it's the Younger Dryas impact event. Dr. Robert Schoch has with Dr. Dr. Anthony Perrott, who's a plasma physicist or something like that, came up with the idea that there was a coronal mass ejection instead of an impact that caused all these plasma storms all over the globe. And if you weren't getting into a cave system like Derinkuyu or Anatolia region, that or even Easter Island has different volcanic natural caves. So that's what his basic theory is having to do with that. But with the advanced civilization thing comes is, so after the impact, humanity was shot back into this like primitive state, almost like Dr. Schoch calls it a solar induced dark age, basically. So there was an event, we lost everything, and we had to really rebuild from scratch is pretty much, I think, what their premise is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. So clearly we were knocked backwards, I could say, yeah.
But I don't think I don't think either of them think that there was like flying spaceships or anything of that nature. I think it was just more about where we were before and how far it set us back from where we were before that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that in the archaeology. So Clovis culture disappears in America, and so the people that follow on after that, their lithics, so their stoneworking is more basic or more primitive, you could say. So that's certainly true. In the Near East, so in Europe or the Near East, just to the east of Europe, we have the culture that I think built Gobekli Tepe, which is the Natufian. And so before the Younger Dryas period, there is this group of people that archaeologists have identified as early Natufian. And then after the Younger Dryas period, in the Younger Dryas period, so after the event, they archaeologists now call these people the late Natufian. So they're distinct groups, and that's because their lifestyle has completely changed. The early Natufian are thought to be sedentary by and large, so they stopped being they stopped roaming the countryside. They've become sedentary. They started to build houses, essentially, of a kind. And they started to settle down. They've begun to experiment with agriculture. This is the early Natufian. And even there's a site called Tel Caramel, which has being discovered in Syria, which is really interesting. They've even got archaeological evidence there for stone towers. Stone towers. So this is at about the same time as Göbekli Tepe. So we see, yeah. So we even see stoneworking skills that you can then kind of relate to. Okay, if they could do this, then maybe these people might have been able to do Göbekli Tepe. So I suspect they could. So we've got this transition on both sides of the Atlantic. There is this change in culture, and each time it's gone backwards a bit. So that the late Natufian become less sedentary. They start wandering around more. They're more the sort of typical view of hunter-gatherers. Before the Neolithic revolution happens, they settle down again. So yeah, mankind gets knocked backwards at that time for sure. But it's not just, that's not the only time it's happened. I think in my book I suggest there have been other events, perhaps not as significant or not as globally destructive as the Younger Dryas. But there's probably been other events since then that have also knocked humanity backwards. Each time civilization takes a hit, we go back a few steps and we have to maybe not start from scratch, but we have to build up again, okay? Because there was, all the infrastructure is basically gone. We're having to relearn many of the things that we used to know. So yeah, it keeps on happening. It has this curious... Again. Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's something I say in the book. It seems to have this cycle, which you can kind of match onto this 3,000-year cycle, which matches to the precessional period of the Taurid meteor stream, and that's how we get into this the astronomical part of this story. So that basically what happens is that every 3,000 years, Earth goes through this sort of this risky period in time when we intersect the Taurid meteor, or at least that's sort of the core, the dense part of the Taurid meteor stream, and we're at risk from more of these collisions.
Yeah, because that's got all the near impact asteroids. Yeah. As far as when you look at this, what do you think of like John Anthony West, the Sphinx being, like you said, like you think 30,000? Do you think that that's a possibility, or do you think that's just way too far in the past?
Yeah, I suspect. I mean, that's specifically the Egyptian king lists, I think, that John Anthony West was talking about. So there is one of these king lists that goes really far back in time. I think it's the Turin Papyrus. And yeah, I suspect that's all inflated by at least a factor of 10. So I think it's, this is such an ancient, such a difficult piece of text to piece together. And the people at that time possibly were making some of it up. We don't know. So I think you have to be very careful about taking that kind of timeline at face value.
Well, I think it was in correlation to the water erosion around the base of the Sphinx, and how the last time that there would have been that much water in that region would have been that long ago. But I know Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval's position is 10,500 years ago, which would make Leo facing the constellation, or the Sphinx facing the constellation of a Leo, and the three main stars of Orion's belt basically line up with the three pyramids of Giza.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot there. I mean, I mentioned the Sphinx forms one of the chapters of my book, so it's something that I've also got an idea about. And I'll start with the pyramids. I suspect the pyramids, the archaeologists have got the pyramids probably right. I suspect their timeline is about right. I don't know about the Orion hypothesis. It might be true. It might not. I think there's a good chance that it's correct. It's just that the evidence isn't strong enough. So we can't really it's not really convincing.
But what is that? Because I know Teotihuacan's got the same layout as well. Those the three with the one offset.
Right.
What do you
Yeah.
think that is? Do you think that's just you
Well,
know?
I mean, it could be representing Orion's belt. I mean, it's entirely possible. I wouldn't dare to rule that out. It's entirely possible. Perhaps even likely. I think, given what I've been looking into in terms of ancient Egypt more recently, and how popular the constellation Orion was for the ancient Egyptians, then it's an entirely reasonable hypothesis. It's just that, in a scientific sense, if you want to be really confident about a hypothesis, then you need really good statistics,
Sure.
Yeah.
and the statistics aren't quite good enough for the Orion hypothesis. I'm not saying it's wrong; it's just difficult to prove
Sure.
scientifically. But the Sphinx, right? So I think that Shock is probably right about the Sphinx, and that's because there are now, I would say, three good lines of evidence that the Sphinx is older, much older than conventionally thought. So there's Robert Schoch's original weathering evidence, and originally he said, I think he estimated somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 BC based
Mm-hmm.
on the weathering. And then after talking with, or then about on hearing Graham Hancock's idea, I think it was, or Robert Bovell, I think he extended his timeline back to about 10,000 BC, as you say. My view is that he should have stuck where he was. I think he was spot on with his 5,000 to 7,000 BC time age. And that's because there's now two more pieces of evidence that we need to consider. The first is, and actually Robert Schoch mentions this in his more recent book, The Origins of the Sphinx.
Mm-hmm.
So there has been some thermoluminescence measurements performed on the Sphinx temple, or at least the Sphinx temple, which is next to the Sphinx.
Right.
It
They
has
used to build it from the blocks from around the base of it.
exactly, yeah. So it's accepted, I think, even by the archaeologists, that the Sphinx temple sandstone and limestone and the Sphinx limestone match up. So they were
Sure.
one was quarried out of the Sphinx enclosure to make the Sphinx temple. But the limestone blocks of the Sphinx temple are covered with granite facing blocks, and the granite facing blocks have been weathering pattern of the limestone blocks. So the granite blocks have to be the same age as when the limestone blocks were weathered already. So the limestone blocks must be significantly older,
Sure.
in other words, than the granite blocks that are facing them. Now, the thermoluminescence measurements have been performed on the granite blocks, which are younger, and they come out to be about 2,500 to 3,000 BC. So that the granite blocks, which are much younger, are about the same age as the pyramids, roughly, or at least the ancient the older dynasties of ancient Egypt. So that suggests that those limestone blocks are really, really old, much older than.
So do you believe in the idea of Zeptepi, that there was this pre-dynastic civilization or version of Egypt before what we know as Egypt?
I suspect that's probably right. Yeah, I think, and again, this is something I talk about in the book, and I've got a few more points on my blog. I think I'm able to actually date the Sphinx correctly, so to speak, because according to our zodiacal hypothesis, the lion, or the feline, could be a lion or a leopard, actually represents Cancer. I know we think it's Leo.
Right.
We all think it's Leo, but if you go back, our zodiacal hypothesis, which fits at Çatalhöyük and it fits all of the European cave art, the lion represents Cancer. So then, if you then, we've got this massive history of about 35,000 years of astronomy, of measuring solstices and equinoxes and representing them in terms of animal symbols. And then we've got the Sphinx. this huge animal symbol built into the stone. That has to be part of this system. It's not unrelated. It's not a coincidence, yeah. So then if we take the Sphinx is Cancer and not Leo, its date comes out to be around about 6,500 to 7,000 BC, which agrees with Schock's original estimate based on the weathering.
Sure.
And that is now, I think, a lot more believable than a 10,000 BC Sphinx, because at this time, 6,500 to 7,000 BC, civilization has begun. You've got places like Çatalhöyük, which is a town in Turkey with a population of around 5,000 to 6,000 people. You've got Jericho in the Near East. So Jericho with its stone walls and stone towers. So that this kind of architecture, this kind of civilization is there. And the only thing we don't have is any evidence from the Nile Valley that there was a civilization at that time, apart from, of course, things like the Sphinx, which have been conventionally dated to be much younger. So I suspect that the Sphinx and a few other constructions in ancient Egypt are actually about 6,500 BC and are related to these other, this sort of explosion of civilization. So then you can ask, well, what happened? What happened to the people along the Nile, living by the Nile around 6,500 to 7,000 BC? Why do we not see any evidence for them? It's the Taurid meteor stream again, I suggest in the book. There is the strongest climate event of the whole Holocene period, so that's the last 10,000 years. The strongest climate event is known as the 8.2 kiloyear event, and this happened in 6,200 and something BC. And also that coincides with our passage through the Taurid meteor stream, or the core of the Taurid meteor stream. So I suspect that, much like we had the Younger Dryas event, there was another event, 6,200 BC, that wiped out, potentially, this Zep Tepe, this first ancient Egyptian civilization, who built the Sphinx and a few other structures. And but they were wiped out. So we've completely misinterpreted the evidence, I think, in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and there is some weird, obviously, you look at Gobekli Tepe, 11,600 years old, and then you look at dynastic Egypt, let's just be generous and say 3,000 BC. I think that's the first hieroglyphs, or 3,200 BC, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big distance. Like, we can fit a couple of our civilizations at least in there. So, what do you think? Do you think that there was possibly this dark age, or do you think that we'll find out in the future that, like you're saying, that's probably when Egypt was doing a majority of their stuff that they're known for, in terms of, not obviously the dates that we can verify with the pharaohs and stuff like that, but in terms of building structures and that kind of stuff?
No, I suspect most of what we see in Egypt is correctly attributed to the dynastic period that we know about. But just not all of it. I suspect there are some structures, just a few structures perhaps, and maybe a lot more that are still buried and hidden beneath the sand, because a catastrophic event of this kind, if you've got a tsunami, a mega tsunami, which is bringing in loads of silt, it's going to cover everything up.
Sure.
So